as opposed to a heritage expert. So my role with a project like this is really the land use planning side, and I work with all the consultants that assist with preparing applications to the city. So this application is a very extensive one. We have a plan of subdivision, which will eventually divide the land into blocks. We have an official plan amendment because right now the lands are institutional and we'd like to make them a mixed use land use. And we have a zoning bylaw amendment, and the zoning bylaw amendment really puts the nuts and bolts to the project in terms of regulations and setbacks and finite numbers on the development. And at this point in the process, from a city planning perspective, we've had an open house, which was held in the summertime. And there's actually a couple of meetings that are coming out that people should take note of. The formal Planning Act public meeting with the City of Kingston Planning Committee will take place on October 7th at 6 p.m. And similar to this meeting, it's held by Zoom. So it's ideal to pre-register for that meeting so that you can attend with the City of Kingston Clerk's Department. In addition to these more formal meetings, the development team has done a series of less formal neighborhood introductions, and we actually have a meeting, an open house tomorrow night on site. And if you'd like to attend and speak some more, there is an RSVP on the project website. We're on. And the project website is unionparkkingston.ca. And on that website, you can register for the open house that's taking place from 4 to 7 tomorrow on site, in person, in a tent. And that's why we have the RSVP, because of the in-person nature of the event. So with those items covered, and we've already spoken, Shirley already spoke to you about the Siderius team, and also briefly introduced Barry. I'm going to just give a little bit more on the team of our heritage experts, because there's actually a two-team group here. There is both John Stewart and Barry Padolsky. And John, who's not here speaking with us tonight, is the principal of Commonwealth, and he has extensive experience in building conservation, planning, and management of cultural resources and design. Some of his credits are serving for 4 years as the first director of the Heritage Canada Main Street program. And he was responsible and has been responsible for many downtown revitalizations across the country. John's also a founding member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. Switching over to Barry, Barry has a very long repertoire because he's been practicing since the 1960s. And is an impressive man, both an architect, an urban designer, and heritage expert. I'm looking forward to hearing him speak tonight myself. Some of his notable restorations include the Victoria Memorial Museum, which is the Museum of Nature in Ottawa, Ottawa's Byward Market Building, the adaptive reuse of the Rideau Canal Museum in Smiths Falls. And that's really just to name a very few of his incredible projects. And Barry's led and served on a number of multidisciplinary teams and prepared many architectural, urban design, and heritage guidelines. And it's really the uniqueness of these two team members that made them the right ones to work on this heritage strategy. So just briefly, heritage strategy versus heritage impact statement. This group, I'm sure, is very, very familiar with heritage impact statements because it's a standard planning requirement when development is taking place. The difference here is that we're going one level higher. And the heritage strategy is a guiding document, and its purpose is for the integration of heritage conservation and management within the overall property planning and management framework. And really, it's going to assist both the developer and the city, the approval authority, so that the resource can be managed properly. It's a guiding document And it inserts significant heritage considerations into the overall development proposal. And it's the principal findings of the heritage strategy that Barry will speak to us tonight about that will actually form the basis for the future site-specific heritage impact statements that will take place subsequent in the process. So this is an early stage process. It doesn't exempt any of the blocks from heritage impact statements. Those will all still take place and be required. And it's this, this document's a little bit unique, particularly for the city of Kingston, because of its very extensive and comprehensive nature. And ultimately, the hope from the strategy is to achieve a consistent approach, or rather a strategy across the entire site, particularly because it won't all develop at once. It will take time for the site to develop. And this underlying strategy will bring that consistency over time. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Barry to speak to everyone about the strategy. Thanks for the chance to speak to you tonight.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Shirley, and thank you, members of the Frontenac Heritage Foundation, for having this meeting and inviting Siderius, and particularly giving me a chance to frame my thoughts about heritage conservation, a subject that, if you indulge me, I will like to just share a little bit of my background, in that my interest in heritage conservation actually goes back to 1972.
Barry, could you speak up, please?
All right, thank you for that. Let me just see if I can increase the volume a bit here.
Barry, as you increase the volume, I will let everyone know, I believe John Stewart is on the call.
Good. Oh, John, glad you're here. How is it now in terms of the voice levels?
That's much better.
Okay, good. In any case, this is an opportunity for me to just share with you that my interest in heritage conservation actually started in 1972 as an advocate. Sorry, there's some people talking. Could somehow there be some...
Just muted somebody.
Okay, seems a bit better now.
I think I muted the right one.
Okay. In addition to being a heritage consultant and architect, I've always also, like yourselves, been an advocate for heritage conservation. And my career in advocacy started in Ottawa in 1972 at part of the group of Heritage Ottawa that tried to save the Rideau Street Convent. And as you know, when you visit Ottawa, the convent chapel is in the National Gallery. And that was the outcome of that campaign, which led to my interest. My interest in jails, and I do have an interest in jails that goes for decades, because I'm the heritage consultant and architect to the Nicholas Street Jail in Ottawa, which is currently a hostel. And I have to confess that I am their resident heritage architect without parole. Somehow I can never get out of being their advisor now. And also, I think it's worth in the preamble to look at the Union Park project, which is an adaptive reuse. It's an infill, it's a rehabilitation project. But in Western culture, at least, we have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 years where we have altered and adapted buildings. So this is not a new activity in this part of the 21st century. It goes back to the Parthenon. Some of you who have studied Western culture may remember that in its history, it was renovated and adapted to be a Christian church. And then it was renovated to be a mosque, and then eventually to a museum. And the same thing with monuments like Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, which was once a Christian church, and then a mosque. Roman amphitheaters like the one in Arles, France, was an arena, and then it became a whole town when the Roman Empire collapsed. In the 19th and 20th century, power stations have been converted to museums, factories, schools, and churches, into brew pubs, into housing, into art centers and hotels. Recently, the Vienna Gas Works was turned into apartments. So here in Kingston, in the Union Park project, we're carrying on things that we have done for almost millennia. And having said that, I think I'd like to just give you about a 20-minute to 25-minute synopsis of the Heritage Conservation Strategy for Union Park. And if Zoom is working right, you'll be able to see, or maybe you won't be able to see, the next slide. Just a moment now. Surely we have encountered a little glitch here. So let me stop sharing. Try again here. Okay. So what you're seeing on your screen, I hope, is the table of contents of the Heritage Conservation Strategy for
No, what we're
Union
seeing are the thumbnails of all the people
Okay.
participating.
Okay.
Should I share the screen again, Barry?
Yes, please. Yeah. Okay, let's try again.
David Gordon, have you got any suggestions? I know you're quite good with Zoom. There we go.
You should have my screen share. Now I'll try to.
I have your, looks like your desktop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get this here.
We have the table of contents.
Okay. Let's see if we can work with this. So I'm going to give you a basically an overview of the Heritage Strategy. The details of it are in our Heritage Strategy report, which I hope you get a chance to read, because it is, a kind of model, a model study that we hope will be of value to Kingston and to the review of the adaptation of the former prison for women. What I'm going to do is start with something that is the developer's vision for the whole site. And here is a bird's eye sketch of the former prison for women with the development encircling it. And it's seen as a carefully designed community which is open with a healthy mix of residential, commercial uses. And the vision for Union Park attempts to embrace the heritage values of this designated site, which we have to concede was a socially dark and now vacant heritage landmark. And I think that the best way for those who have not had a chance to study the plan yet would be just to have me run through the major elements of the plan. You can see that on the left and the right, you have the orientation Union Street at the top and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard on the right-hand side, number 2, King Street at the bottom south, and the the museum and steam plant, item 4, and the former prison for women, item 6, is going to be adapted for 24 apartments, condo apartments. And then to the west, we have the seniors retirement and apartment development. And then item number 9, the important open space feature, the West Park, which will be beautifully landscaped. And number 10, something that many are interested in, which is the healing garden on the axis of the entrance to the prison for women. And then number 12, the hotel. Number 13, which is a future development, will be a mixed-use apartment building at the corner. We can come back to this later, but I think that at first it was important just to give you a sense of the overall. I think that Mike has certainly given a good description of the role the heritage strategy is going to play in the planning approval process. But one thing which is really important for us to remember is that the guidelines that are in our heritage strategy are to provide a framework for the specific development of each block. And as Mike had said, there'll be 4 specific heritage impact statements that will accompany the more detailed plans for each of the blocks when they come when they're developed in accordance with the phases. One thing which I'd like to draw your attention to, just to remind ourselves that in Canada, we have adopted a document called Standards and Guidelines for Historic Places in Canada. You are probably very familiar with it, being a Heritage Foundation, but the thing that I always like to remind myself is that in order to intervene into any historic place, Standards and Guidelines, it cautions us to make sure that we understand the heritage values of the historic place, in this case, the prison for women. And then following understanding, we then undertake the planning process, the one that we're in right now, before we intervene in any way. And this is something that is expected. And as part of the understanding, there's been a lot of historical research on the prison for women and Kingston Prison itself. I'm not a historian or an expert in that, but I appreciate it. And also, like you, appreciate the fact that penalizing women precedes this particular prison for women that we are dealing with today, and that within the walls of Kingston Penitentiary, there was an earlier building that was dedicated to incarcerating women. This was the one that is now known as Administrative Building A3, a stone building within the walls. And that was built in 1909, 1907, 1909. And as you know, because of overcrowding in the Kingston prison and the recommendation of the Minister of Justice, this initiated the whole project of having a distinct, separate prison for women just to the north of the existing penitentiary. So on this historic aerial photograph here, you see the Kingston Penitentiary number 1, and then what was then an open space to the north, the future location of the prison for women. It too was designed by the architectural staff of the Department of Justice, and in 1925, construction actually began. And so you see here the excavation at the beginning of the foundation walls for the building that we now know as the P4W. Naturally, the labor for this project were prisoners. During construction, we're now looking at the cell blocks under construction. Presumably some of the inmates who are laborers and their guards looking relatively happy on a sunny day. And then as the cladding, which was limestone cladding, was being applied to this massive concrete building, there was a period in 1932 where male inmates were housed on the grounds around the building because of a riot in the Kingston Penitentiary. And that occupation lasted about a year and a half. But eventually, in January 1934, the prison for women was officially opened. Now, the evaluation of the heritage qualities of this building was done by the Federal Heritage Building Review Office. And their report identified the key elements in the building's history. And as you know, the building has character-defining elements. It is of classical architectural style and form. You recognize the classical features, the dome, the columns, and of course the cupola and the copper roofs are heritage-defining features, as well as the building's contribution as a visual landmark in Kingston's penitentiary's cultural landscape. And some have asked about the interior, and of course in the designation, the heritage character defining elements do include the interior cell block design, the poured concrete walls, the terrazzo floors, and so on. This is from the FIBRO report of 2001, and they have this cryptic note at the end which says, "The wing is severe and functional in appearance." And as the cell block is today in its deteriorating form, vacant since the year 2000. In the Heritage Conservation Strategy, we have actually gone through the site history so that we can appreciate the evolution of the site. Of course, in 1868, and in open space, by 1966, the walled compound was filled with buildings. And for those that see the site today, it's hard to imagine what was behind the walls, but it was a whole community of buildings with specific functions for each one, in addition to the administrative block and the cell block wing. And then on the right-hand side is the aerial view in 2017, after the walls, well, most of the walls have been taken down and the ancillary buildings removed. A closer plan of what the site looked like inside the walls from 1966 to the late 1990s, and the specific function buildings, some of which you see on the north side here, and others, like the recreation and dormitory building, also on the north side, made up this complex that served its purpose until the year 2000. So I'd like to get into now a broad brushstroke of the heritage conservation guidelines that are included in the heritage strategy. I think it's important to see the 5 key elements of it. The first has to recognize the views that this prison, this former prison, occupies in the visual landscape of Kingston. And so what you have mapped here are a series of key views taken from the context surrounding the property. The first of which is the long view from the harbor, which when you're down there, you can currently catch sight, although in a very minor way, of the cupola. And that's one of the views that has been protected, as well as the three views from Sir John Macdonald Boulevard, the whole cone of views when you're driving or walking or bicycling north and south along Sir John Macdonald Boulevard, where you are able to capture, a full view of the administration block and its cupola. And this is considered to be a very important part of the identity of Kingston, and is being conserved in the heritage strategy and in the development. There are also secondary views from Union Street at the intersection to be able to catch the glimpse of the cell block, and the same thing is true from the south from King Street, looking up towards the museum. And each of these views, I'll be showing you some thumbnails of them and how the new development fits into it and respects them. But the thing I wanted to go on to next has to do with the site layout. The guideline that we have adopted here is to ensure that the former prison for women can always be seen in the round, and so that you have a triad of new buildings pushed as far away from the prison as possible in order to create a vast sort of park or square that the new buildings will be the audience for the gem in the center. I think the other things that we talked about are massing and form, the architectural design and materiality, and some specific guidelines for the adaptive reuse for the prison for women itself. So moving more specifically into the key views, these are thumbnails of them, of the 9 views that were considered to be important. And looking at them specifically, each one, here's a view from the corner of Sir John Macdonald and Union Street. You're looking towards the administrative block and the cell block wing, and what you see on the left is the future hotel, and just above the cell block you can see a portion of the seniors home in the background. And in your foreground you'll see a walk that is leading from the intersection at the corner, and that leads directly to the it's focused on the cupola, so that you have a kind of processional way that will reinforce the value of this symmetrical building. And of course, here's the key view on Sir John Macdonald Boulevard, looking towards the north and west, and the future hotel is on the left, and you see the clear view of the prison in the center of the photograph. Another very interesting view is taken from King Street, essentially from the entrance of the Kingston Penitentiary, looking up towards Cedar Hedge, which is the custodian's house. One of the things that the guidelines urged and was done is that the hotel mass was moved to the east, so that when you're looking at this particular view, you have the sky, unobstructed view of the sky in the background. And then a view also from King Street West, looking up at the west yard, which is now going to be a recreation and landscaped open space with a set of steps that leads up through the site to make it inviting from the south. And finally, the view from the southern end of Portsmouth Harbor, where the cupola is seen between the buildings that will be part of Union Park. One of the things that we were seeking in the guidelines was to ensure that the seniors building and the hotel building had a form which framed this particular view of the administrative building and cupola, kind of a gateway feature from Portsmouth Harbor. Now going back just to reinforce the comments about the site layout, this kind of red rectangle shows the strategic value of an open space around the prison for women and the new apartments that will occupy it, so that the enjoyment of the composition can be seen in the round. And the red dotted arrows show the porosity of the site, where it can, the center feature of the site can be seen from the public realm, from the streets. I guess that this is a way of saying that this place was once an enclosed penitentiary, an enclosed prison. Now it is open to the public, open to the residents, and open to the city of Kingston. One of the key elements in understanding the site and its heritage values and guiding the future development of the triad of buildings is to understand the scale and massing of the prison for women, and taking that and introducing a similar scale in part to the new buildings. This really was distilled into the idea that each of the buildings should have a kind of low-scale podium, and that the podium should dominate the massing of the building as people walk through it or are at grade level, and that the eave line of the prison for women at geodetic elevation 106 is the line that the podia or the basis of the new buildings should try to respect. And that is to serve to offset the visual impact of the taller elements of the building. So if you have something very strong at the base, it is what people generally relate to when they're in the context, in the vicinity. And this is a successful architectonic approach that has been achieved in other cities and other places. And I think that you recognize this technique as being one that deserves to be incorporated. When it comes to the architectural design and materiality, we recommended, and the team has adopted, using stone cladding as one of the principal elements of the podia design of the buildings, and along with glass. And that's to reinforce the compatibility with the heritage character of the prison for women. One of the other things is to look for is how the architectural design and the proportions of the new elements of the new buildings demonstrate their sympathy for the character of the prison for women. And of course, the upper parts of the new buildings have a great opportunity for diversity. Now, in the field of heritage conservation, standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada really always asks us to decide on the conservation approach. Is it preservation? Is it rehabilitation? Is it some combination? Is it just maintenance? But in this case, rehabilitation has been selected as the conservation approach. And quite frankly, adapting the interior of this former prison required a lot of ingenuity to achieve an imaginative fit. And the heritage strategy includes replacing the 1981 south wing of the building, and that was not included in the designation, with a new building of the same scale that meets standard 11 for compatibility. So you can see we always refer back to standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada, in that is the baseline which most of the interventions in heritage, designated heritage sites can continue to respect. So I won't go too much in detail here, because I know that you have a lot of questions that you'd like to ask, but certainly the design intent of the master plan and the architects working on each of the elements, and the landscape architect, have all attempted to incorporate the key views, the site layout, the massing and form, the design materiality, and in the way in which the prison for women is being adapted. On this plan, we have identified a lot of the key elements, like the West Yard Park, the landscape pathway that bisects the site from north to south, things like the formalized tree planting, and memorial garden, the public art wall, Gateway Plaza, and interpretive signage, because interpreting the site will be an important attribute of the public experience and the residents' experience on this site. And in a little more detail, the list of the landscape features that when you study the plan more carefully, you'll be able to kind of appreciate the level of context. Now, looking quickly at the components that are the most probable to be in the earliest phases, first is the Union Park Seniors Housing. That's to the west of the prison for women. And here you can see how the massing and form incorporate the idea of a podium, in this case, a two-story base that is made of limestone cladding and glass. And the upper parts of the building also include a palette of grays to be compatible with the color scheme of the stone prison for women, and also additional stonework on some of the vertical elements that are shown in these two parts of the seniors housing development. And then in the hotel, this view, from Sir John and Macdonald Boulevard, you can see the four-story portion, which is the podium, same scale as the prison for women, and employing stone and glass and a palette of gray materials to help make the whole thing fit in together with the site. And another view from the west, where you can see the hotel proposal on the right with its podium area, and also the first view of the apartment wing, the south wing, that will be added to the prison for women as part of its adapted reuse. And then a closer view here from Sir John and Macdonald Boulevard, looking at the south wing, which is in gray limestone. They've introduced balconies for the purpose of demonstrating that this is an open, outward-looking community now rather than an inward, secured, punished community. And then back to our bird's eye view, which emphasizes the space, the open space around the prison for women, and the elements of the massing and architectural forms of the two major components that will be in the earliest phases. And as Mike Keene has said, the next steps, of course, are strategy has been submitted to the City of Kingston, and we're now in the process of sharing the ideas with the public. And as Mike had said, in the future, there'll be 4 specific heritage impact statements required to accompany the very specific proposals for each of the parcels. So there I've compressed, quite an extensive heritage strategy into, I hope, not much more than 20, 25 minutes. And I'm now very interested in questions and comments, and thank you for being able to listen to me. I've enjoyed this. Back to you, Shirley.
Shirley, just before you jump on, I just wanted to clarify that as part of the next steps process, the city has engaged Andre Scheinman to complete a peer review of the heritage conservation strategy, and that process is underway. Andre has been involved representing the city on this file since the beginning, off and on for the last 3 years. So he's familiar with the property intimately now. He was up crawling around in the attics and in the cupola and through the bowels of the building over the last few weekends. And so he's now doing the peer review for the city. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that.
Thank you, Martin. So how do we, I'm not seeing any, I don't see any raised hands. I just have to caution everybody, I'm getting a blinking screen here. I don't know if anyone else is getting that. It may be my own technological glitch here, but I'm just checking the chat function. I don't see any questions there. Surely people have questions for Barry.
Do we need to stop sharing right now? Is that what's happening?
I'm not sure, Penny. I would suggest that people might want to actually ask about some of Barry's slides, but we could stop sharing. That might make it easier for people to express an interest.
Would you like me to stop share on my side?
Thanks, Martin, for that test message.
Yeah, so the chat's working. So
Yeah. Okay.
I'm wondering, it's probably no way to get an answer on this, but I'm wondering how many people have had the opportunity to either read or browse the heritage conservation strategy. It really is a fascinating read. I sort of jokingly say it'll be on the New York Times best top 10 lists sometime soon, but it is something we're spending some time on a Saturday with a coffee to read through.
It'll only be second to some of David Gordon's books.
Oh dear, here we go. Careful, I think Jennifer McKendry's on this call. She's got a book out as well.
And yours.
So we do have a question from Ann Patterson. Ann is asking, where is the heating plant going to be placed? So I don't think that was mentioned. I believe Barry or Martin, would you like to address that?
I think that's for you, Martin. Yeah.
Sure. Well, the heating plant actually belongs to Correctional Services. It's not actually on the site that we purchased. And it's still a functioning heating plant, supplying heat to the various corrections buildings in the immediate area. It doesn't serve the prison for women property any longer. So it's, as far as we know, it's intended to remain as is for the foreseeable future.
Anybody else have any questions?
There's a second question
Oh,
there.
I
Yeah,
see, yes.
yeah,
How many-
yes. It would stay in the same location. The heating plant is actually connected to the various buildings by underground tunnels and infrastructure. So there's no plan that I'm aware of, at least, to relocate it. It would be probably cost prohibitive to consider relocating it. So it'll stay where it is now. One of the good things about it staying where it is that portion of the prison wall, which is actually on our property on the north side of the plant, will remain, and that will be the location where we'll have our art wall. And we're just putting together. We're just at the starting stage of putting together an advisory group on helping us with coming up with the right art that should be affixed to the wall, and also on the signage that Barry referred to that'll be along the connecting pathway. So that'll be an advisory group that we put together of various people from the community that have an interest in some expertise in that regard.
Martin, while we're on the topic of walls, do you want to mention the wall on the west side of the property?
Sure. So the wall on the west side of the property was retained when Queens took down the rest of the walls. And the reason for that is, my understanding is the residents to the west in the village preferred that the wall be kept. I'm assuming in part because they envisioned Queen students and shenanigans going on the property that we see on the main campus. So it was our intent, after conferring with some of the neighbors, to keep the wall. It also allows the wall to still be an ode to the past and be maintained as a view to what the prison was like at one point in time. There will be about a 22-foot section on the very north end of that wall that'll be removed just to open up the site when you're coming east on Union Street. And we've met with the immediate neighbor, and they're quite pleased with that section of the wall coming down. But the balance of the wall will remain exactly the way it is. There's a little side benefit that comes from that the retirement home that'll be built parallel to the wall will have quite a landscaped area in between the building and the wall that creates for a microclimate because of the wall in the building. So they incorporated that into their landscape designs. Just so everyone understands the site a little better, the retirement home building is approximately 30 to 40 feet east of the wall. On the west side of the wall is another 20 feet that we own before the property line. And then the lots on Gardner Street are all about 305 feet deep. And the back portion of those properties and our 20 feet on the west side of the wall is heavily treed with quite a bit of tree canopy. So none of that is being touched. We're not doing any development on the west side of the wall, so that'll remain as is.
Thanks for that, Martin. One of the questions we have from Jackie is how many residents are expected to be living on the site? And she's asking how many might be expected to be wandering around in the parkland and the green space. Do you have ideas in terms of population?
Well, the seniors home in itself will consist of 141 retirement units and 74 seniors apartments. So the retirement units would, in all likelihood, be just one person living in each unit. The seniors apartments might have one or two people living in those apartments. The condominium going into the Heritage Building is only 24 units, so there would be somewhere between 24 and 40 or 50 or 60, people tops living in that building. The hotel will be 119 rooms if it's approved the way it's proposed. And then Block A is a future building yet to be designed, but it would be a little larger in terms of numbers. But we really haven't spent any time working on a design for that yet because we really don't know what it's going to be.
We
In
also
terms
have a
of,
question. I'm sorry, Martin.
sorry, I was just going to say, in terms of use of the park will not be a private park; it'll be a public park, and we're hoping that not just the residents of this project, but people in the immediate neighborhood will enjoy it. It'll be quite a spectacular park once it's all complete.
Sorry about that, Martin. I didn't
No
mean
problem.
to speak over you, but related to this is do you have numbers on parking? I know most of it is underground at this point, but would you have numbers that you're planning for?
Yeah, we plan for most of the parking to be underground and it's so out of sight. And we purposely kept the parking away from any of the front yards of any of the buildings, which took a little bit of effort to position these buildings. It's like a jigsaw puzzle when you start looking at all the heritage views and setbacks and trying to get the functionality of these buildings and access and garbage and snow and fire trucks and police and all that sort of thing, emergency services in and out of the site. And having a certain amount of convenience parking on the ground level. It was a bit of a challenge, but we limited it to 54 spaces on the surface, and then there's several hundred underground.
Okay. Next question relates to buildings on the broadly around the site. Symmetry seems to be important to respecting the heritage character of the P4W building. The renovated north side balconies are balanced 3 and 3. The south facade seems to have 3 balconies at each end, but only 2 in the middle. Just curious. Is maybe that's a design question, but does anyone have an answer for that?
I could probably comment on that. I think that while the administrative block and the cell block were designed formally, I think that buildings like this, classical buildings, often have additions and wings that are asymmetrical. I mean, going back to European models or other buildings in Canadian cities, this is not unusual to have an asymmetrical wing. For instance, the new south wing that's replacing the former activities building creates an asymmetrical composition. The balconies are minor elements compared to that, but these things work in formal compositions, and standards and guidelines in historic places in Canada admits that as long as the massing and character are deemed to be compatible. It's compatibility that's important. And compatibility means, can the additions live with comfortably and respect the original heritage resource? That's the test that we really should be applying to these things.
In addition to Barry's comments, the units that are on the south side and close to the crux of the building are they're 2-story units. That was the only way for us to get the square footage it's a very challenging wing to try and figure out a floor plan that works. So those two units are stacked apartments. So there's one patio on the ground floor and one balcony on the 3rd floor to serve those 2 units. That's another reason for the difference.
Okay, the next question is, despite all the arguments and details about this and that in the plan to preserve heritage, it looks to me like the main historic building will be swamped by a bunch of boxy modern buildings. The lovely green space we neighbors enjoy will be a mere bunch of postage stamps. Sorry to sound so negative. I guess the development just doesn't sit well. I think
I
this
can
goes to
give a
your
response
comment
to
about
that.
porosity.
Yeah, I could certainly comment on that. I think that I, being an architect, appreciate how sensitive the public rightly should be about the architecture in our communities. I think that in this case, the standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada and generally heritage practice does not require us to replicate historic buildings. I think that each building should be of its era, and there's nothing fundamentally flawed about modernity and modern language. The key, again, is compatibility. I think that we don't want the new buildings to compete with the center of attention, the soloist in this case, and hence the reason for using stone and glass and a palette of gray that will help honor the existing building rather than compete with it. But I certainly, do recognize that the specifics of architectural design are not embraced by all people equally. And so I don't take offense because I happen not to be the architect of these buildings. But I certainly think that this kind of dialogue is important. And I think that the green space that is being created by this development is one that should be measured against the enclosed prison that existed formerly, and it demonstrates a kind of evolution in our built assets in cities that I think should be, I think, welcomed in that the site, will have public open spaces, and certainly from the public realm, it will have the porosity that I think that the site deserves. I'm interested in other people's comments on that as well. I'm always a student.
Perhaps I can just add to Barry's comments that one of the things we're very proud of about this design is that 75% of the site is open space, and open space includes the roads and the landscaped areas and parks. So the roads consist of about 18% of the site, and 56% of the site is landscaped area, including the park. So we are of the view that we've created a plan that leaves a tremendous amount of open space and porosity that people can enjoy.
And I'm the one who made those sour remarks. Why do you need to have so many apartments and condos and units? Why can't they all be like smaller buildings about half of that height? Is it just to make more money? It just seems like a lot of building when it's going to swamp the original building, which has the nice character and the historic look to it.
Well, I'm not really sure how to answer that other than to say that we're very careful in our design. We know that height is a sensitive topic in Kingston, and we were very careful to cap our buildings off at 10 stories so that there was very minimal, almost no, but there is a little bit, but almost no shadowing or overlook issues for our neighbors. Obviously, the site the project has to be economically viable, but we also, wanted to ensure that we left as much open space. For instance, if we had made the buildings all, call it 4 or 5 or 6 stories, it would have covered much more of the site, so there wouldn't be as much open space. That hopefully answers your question.
Well, I must say I haven't heard sidewalks and roads and driveways considered open space in other situations. However, I've learned something new, I guess.
Well, what I was trying to explain is 54% of the site is parks and landscaped area. 18% is roads and parking. And, that's defined, planning term in terms of open space. We didn't create the definition. So we're just using language that is common to the industry. That's all.
Well,
Okay, the next, Eleanor, I don't want to get into a debate back and forth between people because we have, I'm sorry, but we have a number of other questions which we'd like to get to.
okay.
So I didn't get an earlier question correct. The question was how much general public, not local residents, will be wandering around the whole general area of the buildings? And I think that would be very difficult to estimate, but perhaps you have some idea of what those numbers would be.
I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. Is it referencing just how many people will likely enter onto the site from the neighborhood and use the walkways and parkland?
I think that's the question was the general public. So
yeah.
And I think the sense of it is I think the best way to talk about it is the public land piece, like in terms of the piece that is being dedicated formally, versus the spaces around the building, which are still publicly accessible, but slightly different, in their treatment. So I think it's if I understand correctly, the question is really about the park block, which is the west yard. And the west yard on its block of land will actually connect all the way to Union Street. So there will be a formal connection from Union Street to King Street, which includes the park, which is next to the warden's house, the museum area. So those are the formal parkland pieces. But the nature of these buildings will be very public. Like a hotel is very public. The landscaping around a hotel is very public. The condo has elements of public, particularly the front yard, where there's the garden being designed with the P4W collective that will be right on the front lawn with Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard. So there's the open space that Martin talked about is largely all publicly available, even though from a planning sense, some is formal and some is not. Hopefully that helps.
Right. The next question actually relates to this. The rendering makes it look like there will be a park at the corner of Union and Sir John A. Macdonald, but the site plan notes a pair of high-rise towers. How can we judge the overall massing on the site when the tallest buildings are not included? What will the view on the first slide look like when there are a couple of towers there?
Well, maybe Barry, can you just comment on the sight lines and the setbacks associated with Block A, and then?
Sure. Why don't I actually scroll, if people can still see the screen, to the site plan. Let me just get it right here coming up. Hope I'm not making anybody dizzy by doing this. Okay, so can people see the site plan on the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so on the upper right-hand corner is the intersection of Union and Sir John and Macdonald Boulevard. And I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but this green space is what is shown in the perspective, and this diagonal walk that you see on the alignment of the cupola is what is shown in that illustration. The Block A future development is further to the west of that, so that the image that you saw in the perspective is actually an accurate image of what you will see from the corner intersection, the gateway feature. I hope that helps answer the question. And in fact, this is a portion of the protected view to the cupola and the administrative block that is in the designation report of the city of Kingston. So I hope that explanation helps in looking at the site plan and picturing this diagonal walk, which should be quite an attractive walk.
We have another question that asks, is there a slide showing the site from the water side of the Kingston Penitentiary?
The only slide that we have on this deck is the one from Portsmouth Harbor. Is that the one you would like me to bring up?
Well, I think this person is getting at something a little bit different, because the Kingston Penitentiary is adjacent to the harbor, right?
Yes.
So, but if you would pull that up, at least
Sure.
that's,
Okay, I'll bring that slide
I think
up.
that would be helpful. Thank you, Barry.
You
I
can
think while
also-
Barry's pulling that up, I'll just interject for 30 seconds or 10 seconds. As mentioned by Barry, the view that was described as an important view was from the Olympic Harbor as opposed to the prison site, the southern prison site. So that's the reason that we don't have a view from the prison itself.
So I've brought up a view from Portsmouth Harbor, looking towards the north, towards the cupola and the prison for women. That's the one that I think the speaker was not talking about, but this is the one that is identified in the statement of reason for the designation.
So we have another, sorry, I'm missing, how much of the green space will be open to the public? All sidewalks and cross-site links? Will the condo have a private green space at grade that is perhaps fenced off?
Mike Keene, if you would comment to that, I can put the site plan on the screen.
Certainly, thanks, Barry.
Yeah, let me just get the site plan here. Hang on a sec. Yes, there we are. Go
Okay.
ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Barry. So you can see the path I was speaking about a few minutes ago that starts from Union and travels north-south to the park in the southwest corner of the property. And by contrast, you can see the green space around the former prison building. And what I had mentioned was that the front yard was one of those semi-private, semi-public spaces with the memorial garden planned in the northeast corner of that block. So the private spaces, which are made up of patios and balconies, will be privatized as much as possible for the enjoyment of those future residents. But we don't foresee fencing around the condo. It's really part of this broader complex and openness that we are trying to maintain on the site. So the front yard of the condo will be, while a private space, will be quite a public interactive space as well. Hope that helps.
So we have another question about green space. Will the southwest green space be leveled at all? Because there's quite a steep slope going down to King Street.
I can speak to that. So the West Yard Park is federally designated, and the elevation, the grade changes that you see will remain as they are. We're not able to change those. There's a 40 or 50 foot elevation change between the site and King Street, so there's really no practical way to level it, and it certainly would change the heritage features of it. So our plan for the West Yard Park is to try and replicate to as close as we can to the old designs that we've been working with the prison museum curator on when it was the park for the warden's residence. So we're returning the orchards and the naval flagpole and the swings and the tennis lawn and some of the plantings that we were able to research. So those elements will be reintroduced to the site along with the connecting pathway, which will connect down to King Street in the location that we were asked to put it.
So we have another question. Where will workers at the hotel and the seniors residence park?
They'll park underground.
So another question. So the residents of the seniors home and the seniors apartments could have the public wandering around those buildings and their own decks and outdoor areas.
I can tackle that one. So this would be the space on the western property limit between the seniors buildings and the wall. And that space will be private. That space will be secure for the tenants of those buildings. So it will, people can obviously be invited in, but it's not a place that would be wandered through up to Union Street.
Do we have any more questions, folks? Martin or Barry, did you have any closing words, perhaps?
Well, I'll just offer one, and that is that I'm so delighted that the Frontenac Heritage Foundation is participating and monitoring this project. Union Park is a very important historic site in Kingston, and I think that the more eyes on the project, the more people become familiar with the proposals and make genuinely valuable critiques, the better the project will be. And in developing the heritage conservation strategy, I worked very closely with John Stewart, my colleague, who is listening in on this call, and I wanted to ensure that you all understood that this is an effort by two heritage consultants that are really, really interested in this project and interested in the conservation of our historic places. So I really do thank you on behalf of John for being such a good audience tonight.
Thanks, Barry, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to prepare this presentation and to make time for us tonight. And thank you, Shirley, to you and your organization to allow us the opportunity to present Union Park Kingston to your group. And we welcome any questions that might percolate after the presentation. And once again, I'd like to remind everyone that if there is a question or two, or if you'd like to meet with us, we're just having an open drop-in at the site tomorrow between 4 and 7 p.m. and we'll have our storyboards up so we can refer to them if anyone has any specific questions. Hopefully, throughout the coming weeks, we can address any other concerns or questions that might arise. So
Yeah,
thank you for
your
time,
Martin. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We did have one other comment here saying I would like to applaud the team for a thoughtful, imaginative, and realistic design. But I did want to add to say that Nate and Martin took time out last Saturday morning, a week ago Saturday rather, to tour the board around through the building and on the site. And I would encourage people to go to this drop-in tomorrow. You really need to walk the property to get a good feel for the size of it, the size of the open space, It's, yes, I know there will be comments about 10-story buildings, but you really need to get a feel for how large the property is, how large the P4W building is, before you come to our conclusions. So, but thank you, Barry, for your time tonight. Thank you to Nate, to Mike, to Martin, and John. You're there somewhere, and I think Rob Wood is part of the team and is also on the call. So thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. Much appreciated.
Have a good evening.
Goodbye, everyone. Nice to see you.
Good night, everybody.
We were.